All right, so you're into philosophy, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe want to branch out, explore some thinkers you might not know as well.
Mm-hmm.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of Albert of Saxony.
Ooh.
He was a medieval philosopher, but trust me, this guy, he grappled with some seriously mind-bending concepts
Oh, yeah.
that are still relevant even now.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about Albert is he lived in the 1300s and he wasn't just, following the trends. He
Right.
grew inspiration from like the big names, William of Ockham, for instance.
Of course.
But he also brought in ideas from maybe less studied figures, English logicians like William Heytesbury.
Okay, so we're talking about a real synthesis of ideas, pushing the boundaries, and luckily for us,
Yes.
we've got excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Albert of Saxony.
Excellent source.
It's going to be a deep dive into his life, his work on logic,
Hmm.
and his forays into natural philosophy.
It's going to be fascinating to unpack how we kind of bridge those different fields, right? Applying rigorous logic to questions about language and the physical universe.
Okay, so much to cover, but before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Yes.
let's set the stage.
Okay.
Who is this Albert of Saxony?
Well, he was born in Germany around 1320,
Okay.
and he got this kind of amusing nickname, Little Albert,
Little Albert.
to distinguish him from, the more famous Albert the Great.
Oh, wow. Imagine the pressure of carrying that moniker.
Yeah, talk about a legacy to live up to.
Right. And it seems like he did.
He did.
The Stanford Encyclopedia mentions that he earned a Master of Arts at the University of Paris.
Of course.
Can you imagine the intellectual buzz in that city?
Oh, yeah.
And then went on to become rector at the University of Vienna,
Wow.
and then eventually even Bishop of Elberstadt.
Yeah, those are some serious credentials.
Yeah.
And his time in Paris, during the 1300s, put him right at the heart of the European intellectual scene.
So a major figure moving through these influential institutions.
Yeah.
But what were his, real passions intellectually?
Mm-hmm.
What was he known for within the world of philosophy?
Well, his main areas were logic and natural philosophy.
Okay.
It's interesting to note he didn't really get into theology or metaphysics, at least not in any surviving works.
So even within the broad field of philosophy, he had his specific lanes.
He did, yeah.
He was really focused on, how we think
Mm-hmm.
and how we understand the physical world around us.
Precisely. And, those two areas might seem distinct, but for Albert, they were very much intertwined.
Okay.
He believed that rigorous logic could be applied to unravel the mysteries of language and the universe.
That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah.
So let's start with his work on logic then. The outline mentions he was a major figure in this field.
Oh, absolutely. He followed in the footsteps of William of Ockham,
Go ahead.
who was a, key proponent of nominalism, which was a pretty radical idea at the time.
Now, hold on. For those of us who haven't spent countless hours debating medieval philosophy,
Sure.
can you break down what nominalism is all about?
Of course. In a nutshell, nominalism argues that these universal concepts, things like humanity or
Right.
justness, they're just names.
Okay.
They're not real entities in themselves.
Hmm.
For nominalists, only individual things truly exist.
Got it.
So humanity is just this convenient label we use to group together, individual humans.
So it's about how language relates to reality, or maybe how it doesn't in a perfectly neat way.
Exactly. And Albert of Saxony really grappled with this connection between language and reality.
Okay.
One of his key contributions was this detailed analysis of something called suppositio,
Suppositio.
which is all about how words refer to things in the world.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It can be.
Yeah.
But think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to create a map.
Okay.
But instead of mapping physical terrain, you're mapping the relationship between words and the things they represent.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what Albert was doing with suppositio.
So he's not just, teaching people how to construct arguments. He's dissecting the very building blocks of language itself.
Precisely. He was fascinated by the mechanics of language and how we use it to reason about the world.
Okay.
He even delved into paradoxes and insolubles.
Oh.
These are propositions that contradict themselves, right?
Right.
Leading to these fascinating logical knots.
That sounds like some serious mental gymnastics.
Oh, it was. And one of the most interesting things about Albert's work on logic is it wasn't just abstract theory.
Right.
He was trying to understand the power of language,
Okay.
its ability to, both illuminate and obscure truth.
That feels incredibly relevant today,
Doesn't it?
especially in our world of social media and information overload.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us tools to think more critically about the language we're bombarded with every day.
I can see that.
Yeah, and that's just scratching the surface of his work on logic.
Oh, boy.
He also explored these really complex questions about the nature of propositions, how we use categories like quantity to understand the world around us, and even how we talk about relationships.
Okay, my brain is already starting to hurt, and we haven't even gotten to his work on the natural world yet.
We'll get there.
But before we jump into that, I'm curious about this concept of appellation of form
Yes.
that you mentioned earlier. What exactly was Albert getting at with that?
So appellation of form,
Yeah,
bit of a mouthful,
it is.
but essentially it's about how we use verbs related to belief or knowledge.
Okay.
So, for example, when we say, John believes that the earth is round,
Right.
how do we actually make sense of that statement? What's the relationship between John, the act of believing, and the proposition that the earth is round?
It's like he's taking apart the machinery of thought itself, examining the gears and levers that make belief and knowledge possible.
Exactly. And this is where we start to see the connection between his work on logic and his work on natural philosophy. He wasn't content with just, analyzing language. He wanted to apply that same rigorous analysis to understanding the physical universe.
So it sounds like we're about to move from the realm of abstract logic to the realm of, well, actual rocks and stars and planets.
We are, but remember, for Albert of Saxony, these weren't separate realms.
Okay.
He saw logic as the key to unlocking the secrets of both language and the cosmos.
All right. So it sounds like Albert of Saxony, even when he was dealing with something as tangible as, say, the laws of motion, he still approached it with the mindset of a logician.
Exactly, and this brings us to his commentaries on Aristotle's works.
Okay.
On physics and cosmology, we're talking the physics, de caelo, that's about the heavens,
Right.
and even de generatione et corruptione,
Which
reason on generation and corruption.
titles that sound pretty intense even for a philosophy enthusiast.
Yeah, they are.
So how did he approach these classic texts through this, lens of logic?
Well, one way was through thought experiments.
Mhm.
He loved to pose these what-if scenarios, like could a vacuum exist?
Right.
And what would that mean for our understanding of space and matter?
So he wasn't just passively absorbing Aristotle's ideas. It's like he was actively putting them to the test,
Yeah.
trying to, break them almost.
Exactly. He wanted to see where the logic led, even if it meant questioning centuries of accepted wisdom.
Mhm.
And one of the most interesting areas where he diverged from Aristotle was in his understanding of motion.
Now, I remember from our outline that he was a proponent of the concept of impetus.
Yes.
Can you remind us what that is and how it differed from Aristotle's view?
Of course. So imagine you throw a ball.
Okay.
What keeps it moving after it leaves your hand?
Right.
Aristotle believed it was the air pushing it along.
Okay.
But this didn't quite satisfy thinkers like Albert. They proposed this idea of impetus, which is an internal force impressed on the object by the thrower.
So instead of an external force, it's like an internal momentum that keeps the object going.
Yes, like an invisible energy embedded within the object itself. And this idea of impetus was a real game changer for physics. Eventually helped pave the way for our modern understanding of inertia and momentum.
So Albert of Saxony wasn't only playing with logic puzzles, he was directly contributing to the evolution of scientific thought.
He was.
Even if it took centuries for those ideas to, fully blossom.
Absolutely. And he didn't start at earthly motion.
Oh.
He applied this theory of impetus to explain the movement of celestial bodies, even the stars.
Wow.
This was a radical departure from the Aristotelian view of the heavens as this unchanging and eternal realm.
So he's basically taking this logical concept, this tool he's developed, and using it to, pry open the secrets of the universe itself.
And he did it all with incredible attention to detail, drawing on both philosophical and mathematical reasoning.
Okay.
He was very interested in proportions, especially in relation to motion, and he even tackled the classic problem of squaring the circle.
Wow, a true Renaissance man before the Renaissance. But with all these diverse interests, it seems like his work always came back to this core principle
It did.
of applying logic to unravel complex problems.
Absolutely. He was a systems thinker, always looking for those underlying principles that govern both language and the natural world.
It's fascinating how his work seems to anticipate so many of the issues that, we're grappling with today.
Yeah.
The way he dissects language feels incredibly relevant in our age of misinformation.
It does.
And his work on impetus almost foreshadows, key concepts in modern physics.
It's a testament to the enduring power of his ideas. He was asking these fundamental questions about the nature of reality.
Yeah.
Questions that continue to fascinate and challenge us, even today.
So it sounds like he wasn't just an influential thinker in his own time. He also had this lasting impact on the course of intellectual history.
Absolutely. And to understand that impact, we need to kind of look beyond his individual works.
Okay.
And consider the broader intellectual ecosystem he was a part of.
All right. Let's talk about that ecosystem.
Okay.
How did his ideas spread and influence other thinkers? Who were his, intellectual sparring partners?
Well, in medieval Europe, knowledge wasn't just confined to books.
Right.
It was shared through this vibrant network of scholars, discussions, debates.
Okay.
Kind of like, the academic conferences and journals we have today.
So, a whole web of intellectual exchange going on.
Yeah.
With Albert of Saxony as a major node in that network.
Precisely. And one of the key figures he interacted with, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing, was John Buridan.
Buridan.
Another major Parisian scholar who also worked on the concept of impetus.
Ah, yes, I remember that name. Buridan was the one who famously used impetus to explain why a projectile keeps moving after it leaves the thrower's hand.
Exactly. And while Albert of Saxony adopted and expanded upon this idea, he actually had some fundamental disagreements with Buridan on certain key points.
So even though they were both working with this, innovative concept, there was still room for debate and, divergent interpretations.
Absolutely. It reminds us that, intellectual progress isn't about blindly following someone else's ideas.
Right.
It's about critically engaging with those ideas, refining them, and sometimes even challenging them. This dynamic back and forth is what drives knowledge forward.
That's like a lively game of intellectual tennis.
Yeah.
Volleying ideas back and forth until something new and insightful emerges.
And Albert of Saxony wasn't afraid to serve up some aces in these intellectual matches.
I like that.
For instance, he disagreed with Buridan on the nature of motion itself.
Wow.
Buridan saw motion as a kind of flux.
Okay.
This continuous process, while Albert aligned it more with the concept of alteration, focusing on change in quality.
That's a pretty subtle distinction.
It is.
Can you give us a more concrete example of how that difference played out in their thinking?
Sure. Consider the process of condensation.
Okay.
Buridan believed that when something condenses, it gains quantity, meaning it becomes, denser, more compact.
Right.
Albert, however, argued that condensation could be explained solely through the rearrangement of particles within the body, without needing this separate concept of quantity.
So he was applying his, razor-sharp logic to dissect even the most basic physical processes.
Exactly.
Trying to find the most, elegant and parsimonious explanations.
And remember, this was all happening centuries before the scientific revolution.
Yeah.
They didn't have the tools or technology we have today, but they were still grappling with these fundamental questions about the nature of matter and motion.
It's amazing to think about how these, seemingly abstract debates actually laid the groundwork for so much of what we know about the universe today.
It is, and it wasn't just Buridan.
Okay.
Albert of Saxony was also influenced by thinkers from the English logic tradition, like William Hades-bury, showing how ideas were crisscrossing Europe, fertilizing each other, and leading to new and unexpected insights.
It really does paint a picture of a, vibrant intellectual ecosystem.
Yeah.
A world where ideas were constantly being tested, refined, reimagined.
And Albert of Saxony was right at the heart of that ecosystem, shaping the direction of both logic and natural philosophy for generations to come.
So we've talked about his work on logic, his forays into natural philosophy, and his role in this broader intellectual network.
Right.
What would you say is his most lasting impact? Why should someone studying philosophy today care about Albert of Saxony?
That's a great question. Why should a modern philosophy student care about some thinker from the 1300s? It's not like we're still, cracking open his logic textbooks or his physics commentaries.
True, but his impact goes way beyond those specific texts, His ideas kind of resonated through the centuries, influenced later thinkers like Blasius of Parma in Italy, and sparked continued debate in Vienna even into the 1400s. So it's not just that he was a big name in his own time, but his ideas had this, ripple effect
Right.
shaping philosophical discussions long after he was gone.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a case of, passive transmission.
Right.
Later scholars actively engaged with his ideas, building on them, critiquing them,
Mm.
sometimes even using them as a launching pad for entirely new lines of inquiry.
Mm.
That's the sign of a truly influential thinker.
It's like he planted these intellectual seeds that kept sprouting and growing in unexpected ways.
I like that analogy, and I think one of the key reasons his work has this enduring relevance is that he was grappling with these fundamental questions
Mm-hmm.
that are still relevant to philosophers today. Questions about the nature of language, the relationship between logic and reality, the limits of human knowledge.
So even though the specific context might be different, those underlying philosophical puzzles are still the same.
Precisely, and Albert of Saxony gives us a unique perspective on these puzzles.
Mm.
He was working at this pivotal time in intellectual history,
Right.
a time when, that old Aristotelian worldview was being challenged,
Yeah.
and these new ways of thinking were emerging.
So he was right there on the front lines of this intellectual revolution,
He was.
forging new paths, opening up new avenues for philosophical exploration.
And he did it all with a rigor and a precision that's still inspiring today.
Mm.
He was meticulous in his arguments, always pushing for clarity, always testing his assumptions, refining his understanding.
It's that kind of intellectual honesty that's like something to aspire to, no
Absolutely.
matter what field you're in.
He was a model of intellectual integrity, and I think that's one of the key reasons his work continues to resonate with, modern philosophers.
Mm.
He challenges us to be more rigorous in our thinking, more careful in our use of language, and more open to questioning our own assumptions.
It's almost like he's giving us this toolkit for navigating like the complexities of philosophical thought.
Yeah.
A set of principles to help us sharpen our arguments, clarify our ideas, and avoid falling into logical traps.
That's a great way to put it, and I think for someone studying philosophy today, especially someone interested in logic, semantics, or the history of science,
Yeah.
engaging with Albert of Saxony's work can be a really enriching experience.
It's like stepping back in time and having a conversation with, one of the great minds of the past.
Yeah.
Seeing the world through their eyes, understanding how they wrestled with some of the same philosophical puzzles that we're still grappling with.
And even if you don't agree with all his conclusions,
Yeah.
you can't help but be impressed by his intellectual audacity.
Right.
His willingness to, question everything, push the boundaries of thought, carve his own path through the intellectual landscape.
It's that spirit of inquiry, that passion for knowledge that makes Albert of Saxony such a, compelling figure, even after all these centuries.
Absolutely. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just about, memorizing arguments or reciting theories. It's about actively engaging with the world, using our reason to make sense of things, and never being afraid to ask difficult questions.
So after this deep dive, what stands out to you? Do any of Albert of Saxony's ideas particularly resonate?
What strikes me most is his, unwavering commitment to logic as a tool for understanding both language and the universe.
Okay.
In a world, so saturated with information, his emphasis on precise language and careful argumentation feels, incredibly relevant.
He's like the patron saint of critical thinking in the digital age.
I like that. And for me, it just reinforces how vital a clear understanding of language is to any philosophical endeavor.
That's a fantastic point to end on. So if you're interested in philosophy, don't let that medieval label scare you away. Albert of Saxony might just surprise you
He might.
with his relevance, his intellectual rigor, and the enduring power of his ideas.
Well said. There's a whole world of medieval thought out there waiting to be explored.
Yeah,
And Albert of Saxony is a fantastic guide.
absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those intellectual gears turning.